as well for our working partnership with Dale and Drishti and Dan and everyone there. So I'll give you, just to explain where we're coming from, because I think a lot of you know us, but it's been good to meet a broader cross-section of the community here. This strange thing called the Humanitarian Information Unit is an interagency unit that's housed at the State Department, which is actually across the street, but this is an annex of the State Department. The unit is actually an interagency unit that includes USAID, Department of Defense, usually in the form of an Army Civil Affairs officer, and then also the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which in itself is an independent agency, but is part of DoD. Got all that? But the core of it is that we were founded and we're part of the Office of the Geographer of the State Department. And that has been around for a long time. Some of you saw my boss, Lee Schwartz, speak at the keynote, and this is a quote from his predecessor, and this is kind of the foundation of where we're coming from. Bill Wood founded the HIU with the idea that we needed more focus on data, we needed more focus on maps, because he was the geographer, but of course, to get maps, we need data. We were, I think, ahead of the curve in terms of that recognition, with the HIU being stood up in 2003, 2004. So we didn't know what open data was. We're still figuring it out, despite the administration's executive orders and all the initiatives and everything else. It's still a work in progress and a learning experience, but it has certainly helped us to kind of I started at the HIU in 2008, so to just sort of jump on that bandwagon and say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because everything we've been doing for years to make a map or to help inform a decision maker or to help get some satellite data to a UN member is born of the logic of just making data open would make my job unnecessary if we did it right, but that would be a good thing. So with MapGive, a lot of you heard yesterday about imagery to the crowd. My office is kind of the focal point for commercial satellite imagery to support humanitarian and development applications, human security more broadly. We've been doing that for a long time. Generally, that has been point-to-point, so UNISAT or a UN agency or an NGO who can use the raw imagery and do analysis, and maybe internal, maybe a public product like a lot of UNISATs. But we have kind of that pipeline through this license we have for satellite imagery that we talked about yesterday, and we might talk about later, so I won't go into that too much. But we kind of came into this world through the imagery lens, through the imagery angle, looking at how to support tracing in OpenStreetMap through the process we call imagery to the crowd. But MapGive is about more than that. MapGive is a year old now and was built as a public diplomacy campaign. The HIU, I said, is in the Office of the Geographer and Global Issues. That office is actually in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. It makes sense for what we do in terms of needing data, but aside from kind of the odd tension at times in terms of us working in the community and this community and various communities, there's also the fact that we don't do sort of, as a rule, public engagement. That's not what my bureau does. We don't have a public affairs person in every other part of the department. Every other part of USAID has that. So we partnered with another part of the department to build this campaign. And we, like I said, we do imagery. We've supported the Haiyan response, I think, in pretty good time. We had some of the first traceable services out, but that was after Haiyan hit. The next year, thanks to the efforts of Tom and Patrick, who may be in the room or not, we had a lot of services out ahead, and luckily the storm wasn't as bad as it looked like it might be. But we improved dramatically, and that was through working with HOT and with the community on a workflow that we talked about yesterday. But MapGive was built with the recognition that eventually, and maybe given these past week's events, sooner than we might have thought, the crowd, the volunteers, are going to be the limiting reagent, not the imagery, not the available resource. And this was the Ebola response, and that was something we worked on most closely with the American Red Cross. but in a lot of these mapping events over the last year, we've been really heartened to see that the core of what we built with MapGive, the sort of educational tools, are being used. So there's a sort of the Why Map video, which is 3 minutes long, and I think helps, certainly a lot of what we're doing still is internal advocacy, explaining within this huge bureaucratic institution and with our partners at USAID and the US government more generally, like what is OpenMap, what is geography, what is GIS, and then within that, what is OpenStreetMap, and it's any one of those conversations can take hours if not weeks or years. So it's been a useful tool internally, but we hope that and it seems that it's been useful in galvanizing a broader community. Certainly in this past week, we had a huge spike on our site, and we're trying to find ways, and a lot of what we're trying to do is to make this kind of the norm as opposed to the anomaly. And what are we going to do with all the new visitors? I'm pretty sure people came for the video more than anything else on the site, or for the training videos. A lot of events around the world that we're using them. And again, as the Department of State, this is the other sort of thing we want to see. This was actually done organically very soon after we launched MapGive, the translation into Italian by members of the community in Italy. Spanish is in the works, right, Erica?
Yeah.
And we are still in this phase of trying to build the partnerships within the building to make this thing kind of automatic. It's, there's this outside-inside tension where most of the good stuff that's been happening is still by virtue of our partnerships that exist beyond the walls of the building or the annexes. And slowly but surely, we are kind of gathering up those data points and then going to like the bureau, the embassy in Rome, or to the Europe bureau and saying, like, look at this thing, like this is something that you should care about. This is a tool for engagement. This enables the creation of data for Italy or somewhere else around the world. We actually have the Italian embassy here in DC, and their ambassador tweeting about this much more than anyone in the department or overseas, or people overseas were. So we're trying to flip that, or at least make it a little more equitable. This is another thing that happened, like one of the best things that happened in this past year that happened with pretty much very little effort. I talked about MapGive at a conference more than a year ago. A guy from an NGO called Soaptel followed up with Mikkel and I and just wanted a little more background, like how would we run an event if we ever wanted to do that. Never heard from him again. And then we had one call with the US consulate who had a relationship with them. And at that point, the consulate said, well, it sounds interesting, but what if there's a mapping party in Palestine or the occupied territories, and aren't there going to be political issues with boundaries and all the concerns they would expect would first come up from a political officer, works with the U.S. Embassy or the U.S. Consulate. But we talked through those issues, but we still thought we'd never hear anything else. And then all of a sudden, after the Ebola response, or in the midst of the Ebola response, we got a call on a Friday, hey, we're sponsoring this group to do a mapathon in Ramallah for Map for Ebola. And it was kind of automatic. That's the sort of thing we want to see happening everywhere. We have a huge network through our embassies and through our USAID missions, and a huge social media following on all these different platforms. And we are just starting to get traction, I think, on really leveraging that in a more effective way. Another way we're trying to do that is the Educational and Cultural Affairs Bureau. They run all the exchanges, Fulbright, things like that some of you would have heard about, and then a lot of other ones that are much more obscure, but very much oriented toward social entrepreneurs, business leaders, young leaders, students of all kinds, all around the world, people going abroad and people coming here. So we partnered with one of these programs for the Young African Leadership Initiative, and they're doing a series of camps, of tech camps, or what they call them Connect camps, for fellows who studied here already and now are back in their communities in various countries in Africa. And we've kind of built in an OpenStreetMap and mapping component into those Connect camps. As much as possible through this program and through a lot of the other outreach we're doing, we're really just, this is one of the reasons documentation is so important to us, and we've been talking about a lot this weekend, is whenever possible, if we can just point to like, hey, this OpenStreetMap community is doing something in your backyard, if we're talking to the embassy, or the World Bank has a project here, or the American Red Cross has something going on. There are so many U.S. government partners, whether directly funded or just sort of have mutual interests, who are using OpenStreetMap, and it's still hidden from view. So it's a constant kind of outreach and educational campaign. So in this case, we did this Connect Camp in Dar es Salaam. Just so happened the World Bank was kicking off a new resilience project there, using OpenStreetMap workflow in part. So we were able to connect some of the participants in the Connect Camp to go to the kickoff mapathon and plug them into the work going on there. That's the sort of stuff we're trying to do more of. Another part is in terms of the feedback and building the community are the metrics. Mikkel's been working on this with Robert and what's the guy's name? Jennings. We need to make this more automatic. I mean, this is a theme for the community, but definitely for us, where if we may get a desk officer, or a political officer, or maybe even an ambassador's attention for like 5 minutes. And if we can have those kind of real-time metrics of like, this is happening now, these are how many people are actually contributing to this effort, but we have to do it in the course of that day or that week, not a few weeks later when we've gotten around to crunching the numbers. So we've been working collectively with a lot of institutional partners on that over the last year. So this has been the fun part, is working with the partners. Working inside is still really hard. The nice thing is that there has been this growing constituency for a long time around OpenStreetMap and HOT, but it's obviously skyrocketed in the past year or so. So we've had a lot of events. Some of these, of course, are more formal institutions, and some a little less so. We'll have the panel later on kind of sharing the challenges of kind of doing this work within a formal institution and trying to interact with the broader HOT and OpenStreetMap communities. Brian, I didn't put CDC on there because I didn't want to get you in trouble.
Thank you
for the next
one.
So with these partnerships, we're doing a lot of events. We've done a lot of events, trying to have a series of events that kind of build on each other, and again, just an organic model where everyone can do their own thing, but building around a common theme. So with National Geographic and a lot of the folks on the previous page, we did this during Geography Awareness Week in the fall. Recently, we had a good map off between the GW folks right here and the George Mason students and a couple of other universities. Texas Tech, I think, and Nova here in town. Again, a lot of this it serves an end unto itself, but also we've been sort of testing these tools and building these tools as we go along in a more manageable domestic environment, but with the idea of pushing these out and putting these in the hands of our diplomatic overseas missions to do this as a routine kind of thing. We have a social media toolkit that Erica works on that whenever there's an event, we're just pushing it out and trying to amplify everything that's going on. So we've had some success. I said yesterday, Ryan referred to like the fact that it was significant that we had this official department program with MapGive, and I said that we've kind of tricked people into doing that or into making it an official department initiative, which is true. Like there are people who care about public diplomacy and messaging. There are people who care about data, some of them. There are people who care about maps. There are very few who care. There are people who care about volunteer efforts and crowdsourcing, even though we have this sexy thing that you could say crowdsourcing and satellite imagery, in the same breath. It's still the narrative. There are very few where all those narratives speak at the same time. In spite of that, we have had some institutional buy-in. So the Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review just came out. It mentions MapGive in there. And I was actually more interested in getting, there's a big section on data and analytics, and of course on big data. I was much more interested in having a section or a note there of just the importance of geography for sense-making overall. We didn't quite get that. There are too many different drafts to keep track of, but at least MapGive is mentioned as something that's significant. We are in the open government plan. The department, every agency has to do that now under the broader administration-wide open government and open data directives. And we got support from the White House through the Presidential Innovation Fellow Program. The idea is, trying to find up-and-coming tech stars, programmers, coders, future millionaires, Silicon Valley types. We got Mikkel.
None of those things.
But it's been helpful. We actually applied for the program with Mikkel in mind. So it's been really great to have someone coming directly from the community who we've already worked with, but to kind of bring them behind the firewall and behind the veil for a bit and work inside, and also help us engage in a different way with the community outside, who I think we're still kind of introducing ourselves to. And again, in terms of institutional buy-in, we talked about this yesterday. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Premier Satellite Agency, we think, we don't know, maybe, using OpenStreetMap as their foundation-based map. They've been doing it actually for a long time, but they're pushing these public products out, starting with Ebola, and this is part of a sea change for them as well, in terms of trying to, there's a whole part of NGA that has a humanitarian mission, and has been trying very hard to get that data and products out for years, and generally that has gone through the tiny little bottleneck or straw that is us, sort of as an official requester saying, yes, there is someone out there with this need, or this partner, or this embassy, or something else. So there's obviously a lot of sensitivities and issues that come with that effort, but it's also very significant, and they should get credit where it's due. This is the atlas they pushed out immediately when the earthquake hit, and they could only do that because of not only the existence of OpenStreetMap data, but of course the great work that KLL had already done with support of the bank, and we've been involved in with USAID, and that's of course a big part of the argument that we're trying to make, is the value of mapping for the sake of mapping, for preparedness, having that data in place, because it can be useful in so many ways that you never know when disaster is going to strike, but disaster should not be the point of mapping. So, case in point, this is the sort of thing we want to see happen all the time, where we had the U.S. Embassy, incidentally, Kathmandu Living Labs had been supported by the bank, and I've got going on that work with the Open Cities Project, actually has a current relationship with the U.S. Embassy for the Public Affairs Office. So we want to make these linkages wherever we can and amplify them. So they were already kind of aware. They're tweeting about MapGive and OpenStreetMap several months ago. Imagine if we could kind of have that be whenever there is an event anywhere. Every embassy, every mission is just immediately, yes, donate, but also do this. Mobilizing volunteers in their own communities. And right now we're talking to some posts in Europe about organizing mapping events there for the Nepal response, if there's anything left to map by next week. So I think really good progress on that front. I mean, it's been a horrible and tragic and exhausting week, and I know much more so for a lot of people in this room and certainly people abroad. But it's been exciting in terms of what this community has been able to do. And we've, I think, done a much better job documenting that, we collectively, and getting that message out and getting that story out. And I hope that will continue to build on itself. I had to put in my daughter because she's cute, but we still have a lot of work that we can do together to target the next generation, to make them grow up knowing what this thing is. And we're seeing the beginning of that in what the Peace Corps is doing, and I know a lot of folks around the world. I'm excited, and I hope that the department can continue to contribute to that and build on that moving forward. That's it. We're pretty much on schedule, I think. I don't know. Well, no, we're ending at 12:30, right? So I don't know. Is there anybody who's minding me here? I don't know. Am I keeping people from lunch?
Yeah, take a couple questions
Okay.
until we get too hungry.
And then I'll give you an official diplomatic response in about 5 weeks.
So you described the kind of, I wouldn't say tenuous or shaky, but the maybe haphazard way that MapGive has been built out. Is there something that you think would be beneficial in strengthening your case and strengthening your position as an important facilitator of what's going on as far as the U.S. government's support of OpenStreetMap?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, we only want to do this for as long as it's necessary. I mean, that's certainly the case with on the imagery side of things. We will continue to fill gaps as long as we can, and there are gaps that are articulated. But even in terms of contributing to the movement that is OSM, I mean, I really do think it's happening already. Like, this is going to be automatic, for a lot of people in a lot of walks of life, and not just for humanitarian or crisis or health response. But that said, I mean, I still think we have a lot we can accomplish, and the department can leverage in terms of, Miguel talked to crisis mappers about kind of breathing the spirit of OpenStreetMap into our institution and the others that we're working with. And I think there's a lot of validity in that. So I don't know. Yes, I mean, there's definitely a lot of things we could be doing better, we could use help with. I know that the documentation piece is really key to just having those stories, not just the visualizations, the stories, the real use cases. That is what resonates, and going through this was cathartic for me, but also like stressful, because I'm reminded of all these threads that we have and all these conversations. It's like, oh yeah, I've got to get back to you with like this specific example because you happen to work in Nepal before, but now you work somewhere else, but you'll only care about that one specific example, so there's a lot of that stuff. It's a network thing.
I'm a geographer and I'm from Nepal, and I have been following this and this is OpenStreetMap is really new to me in the sense as a contributor, and there has been so much response, and I am thinking about how to sustain that, and having a network of GIS analysts from Nepal, and after event, like you said earlier, that the whole mapping may be in a couple of weeks we'll be done with that for first response, but how can we sustain that, and what kind of resources available? Like Kathmandu Living Lab is doing extraordinary job, but is there a possibility of establishing such labs in other geographic regions of Nepal? And I'd be interested to know things like that, and
I mean, I think again we're a cheerleader in this. I think yes, and that's necessary, and I'm hopeful that we kind of collectively, through pointing to the value, through telling these stories, will make. I think it's already pretty clear that there are more and more kind of NGOs or implementers who are either built around OpenStreetMap or it's a very big part of their workflow and what they do. So I guess it's still, and this does link with a lot of broader initiatives of our office, in which my boss talked about, and we're still in this phase of, what is geography? certainly in the States, but is geography important as a discipline, or is geographic analysis or GIS important? So there's a lot of battles to fight within that. So I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your specific question, but there's a little potential, and we're thankful that there are folks like the bank and the global facility who are directly involved in this kind of work in that longer term capacity building kind of phase. But it's also, the first slide, just around the kind of open data, geographic data thing, was that cycle of kind of disaster response and recovery and longer term development and preparedness and resilience, if you're okay with using that word, is kind of implicit in all of that. It's an essential resource, this kind of data, and keeping it fresh, right? So we may have done a lot of mapping by next week, but then the damaged buildings will get repaired or things will change, and that there's still, we've had a great spike in volunteers, but how do we keep those people invested? How do we keep them engaged? And I do think it has to be kind of enculturated across the board for that to happen, for that to be the baseline.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, where we're at on the evolution of how easy it is for you to do the imagery to the crowd
Oh, yeah.
stuff in terms of, like, I know it's easier to, on a disaster, but for like a Peace Corps use or a
Yeah.
missing maps.
More on like the policy side, like and not just the
Yeah, I just wanted to know how,
Yeah,
if that's
so-
becoming an easier process for you guys and how.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and basically people ask like, imagery of the crowd is that technical process, or that's how we describe. It's about the imagery, and MapGive is about everything else, even if imagery is still part of that and what we're supporting. But as far a big piece of imagery of the crowd when we provide imagery is still that we need to get approval that in some way providing that data, just like when we supply raw satellite imagery, is in the interest of the U.S. government. So that's easy usually in a humanitarian case. We've never gotten the answer no. Maybe we haven't asked in the right scenarios, but again, we're also, no one asked us to support mapping in Syria, but we probably wouldn't have, approached it, for example, at least not in the midst of the conflicts. So, just in terms of internally, the narrative is certainly building on itself. Like, the more cases we have, oh yeah, we did this here, and look what happened. For the first year or so, because we were doing imagery of the crowd for a couple of years before MapGive was started, we just had one or two examples, so it was very hard. We had one that was maybe urban planning preparedness, so if we were then trying to support a task that was more humanitarian in nature or a refugee site, it didn't necessarily compute. Now we've kind of been involved and we're just so aware of examples in the community, even if we haven't supported them directly. So yeah, I mean, again, it's more and more people, just when we go in to give people a briefing with, the average political officer, it's not yet more likely than not that they've heard of OpenStreetMap, but it's becoming more and more likely. And that's, of course, thanks only a very small part to what we've been doing. That's much more a function of everything that's been happening around this community for the last couple of years.
So a follow-up to that question, do you find it, sorry, did I?
There's no one yelling at us.
Okay.
I'll yell at myself.
A follow-up to that question, do you find it more difficult to provide imagery for, it's easy to make the case for acute situations like an earthquake in Nepal, but for those less acute, like preparedness kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, again,
do you find
it's
it
not
more-
difficult. It's just you might have to have a slightly longer conversation.
Okay.
And again, this is, I think, Apollo's going to change that radically, just in terms of the sort of jobs that we supported with the approach to support. And again, that one was a partnership with GeoCenter, USAID. So it also depends on, we're always kind of making sure everyone's okay with what we're doing. So you can always find a stakeholder, but we want to make sure who cares, but we don't want to go that route. We want to make sure everyone who might have a stake is aware. So like the UN mission thinks it's a good idea, as well as the NBC, as well as the Office for Foreign Disaster Assistance. So it's exhausting, but it's also kind of fun when you get everyone to just be like, oh yeah, why wouldn't we support the mapping of an IDP site in South Sudan in the midst of the conflict? Because it really helps with epidemiological data and monitoring hepatitis. Okay, we'll do it. So it's been exciting. End it there. I'll be around. So thanks everybody. And come to our panel on the institutions, because I think that'll be a really good discussion.